Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having me once again, and it's good to be back. It's also good at WIPP to be back on track to with a plan to reopen. If you saw in the various news outlets last week, we finally approved a baseline schedule that has WIPP reopening in December of 2016, and that's a high confidence schedule. So we're confident that by the end of this calendar year that we'll be back in business, and it's been a long time recovering, but what I'll talk a little bit about today is where we're at in the process of recovering the facility and a lot of the things that are going to occur this year in order for us to be prepared to reopen.
JR?
Yes.
Is that going to be a soft reopening is what you're figuring? You know, you talked about, you know, kind of limited basis as far as the reopening?
I don't know that I would call it a soft reopening. It's going to be a formal operational readiness declaration by the Department of Energy. And once it's declared, then it will be official operations that will occur. The way we're characterizing it is it will be a crawl operation. We're going to crawl before we walk, and then we're going to walk before we walk fast. And so what that means is we're going to exercise the process formally, just like we had in place before, from top to bottom, left to right. We're just going to do it slowly to make sure that everyone is properly retrained and we can safely operate before we speed up the pace.
Okay.
So I'll mention that here in a minute too.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I think you've heard that based on the Accident Investigation Board reports and the judgments of need in those reports that there are 5 different entities that are working corrective actions. Those corrective action implementation plans are in full motion. They're at various stages of completion, including us. The 2 that we're watching closely down at WIPP are numbers 4 and 5, the CBFO and the Nuclear Waste Partnership corrective actions. But we are involved in reviews of the implementations of the other 3. So headquarters and 2 entities here in Los Alamos are in the middle of implementing their corrective actions to respond to the Accident Investigation Board reports. So we've turned a corner in our planning. Basically, we're turning the corner from all about recovery to recovery leading to operational readiness. And so, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have a plan in place to declare the facility ready to receive waste again by December of this calendar year. So in the recovery area, we're still in the process of installing a couple of intermediate ventilation system enhancements. If you've seen the presentations in the past, we refer to those as the interim ventilation and the supplemental ventilation systems, and I'll have some pictures of those in a moment. A big part of getting ready, coming out of the recovery, getting ready to operate again is performing the procedures, walking through the processes, making sure that people are properly trained and the equipment is operational. There'll be a lot of those walkthroughs and continuing training throughout the year. We also have the readiness reviews themselves that are going to take place. The operational readiness reviews is a formal process that DOE uses. It requires that the contractors that are performing the operations do their own review, and then once they declare they believe that they're ready, then we, DOE, will then perform our review. That'll be a independent team assigned by the Department of Energy that will come and determine whether or not WIPP is ready to operate and open. So the assumption in the approved schedule is that that will occur this summer, and whatever corrections that need to come out of that will put us in a position to actually go into operation in December. Operational readiness in this context for WIPP is basically the resumption of waste in placement. And resuming waste in placement, being able to take waste from the receiving areas on the surface down into the underground repository, place them in their permanent disposal places, and to complete that operation is really the heart of the readiness review as it will occur. So once that readiness is declared, then one of the assumptions is we can roll the trucks and bring real waste to the gate again like we did before. So that's what that means. So I want to talk a minute about the performance measurement baseline, or PMB as we refer to it. This is the schedule that was approved and shows the waste and placement operations in December of 2016. It identifies the critical path, and it has a lot of assumptions that go with it. We've done risk analyses to determine with a certain confidence level what the things on the critical path might be susceptible to. And so for all of the things that could happen that we can anticipate, we're confident that we'll be opening in December based on this PMB and the critical path on that PMB. But if anything changes in those assumptions, it could cause a delay. So we'll try to keep you posted, and our fingers crossed that we'll be able to start waste and placement in December. But at this point, based on what we know, we're confident that we'll be there. Next, I wanted to show you an illustration and a couple of pictures on the ventilation system. Hopefully, so you'll better understand why the ventilation system in our repository is significant. One way to describe WIPP is that it's a deep geologic repository that operates like a salt mine, but also as a nuclear facility. And so the facilities on the surface are a lot like the nuclear facilities at other DOE sites. They have to be managed that way, but so does the underground repository, but it has to be managed as a nuclear facility in combination with it being a salt mine. So it presents a lot of unique challenges that we know well, and we also know well now that the radiological releases occurred, and so we're planning some improvements, some temporary improvements, some long-term improvements, and some eventual permanent improvements. And so the interim ventilation system is one of the temporary improvements. But if you'll bear with me for a moment, this is, above the line is the surface facilities, below the line is the underground facilities, and what this graphic is intended to show is the movement of air. We basically have fans that draw, excuse me, air from the atmosphere above the facility into the mine, and we pull that air through the mine, and before we let it out on the other end, we filter it with high efficiency particulate air filters. So ever since the incident occurred, the air that's moved through the mine has been filtered. And so one of the challenges is operating a salt mine with a lot of people working in it and still being able to move enough air for that to occur while filtering it through these high-efficiency filters. And so in order for us to do that better, we need to supplement that ventilation system because it wasn't originally designed to always operate in, filtered mode. Thank you for the water. So the interim ventilation system is just additional airflow and additional filters that we're putting in to increase the airflow through the repository, but yet keep it filtered. And then the permanent ventilation system is a project, an official capital project that's going to take a few years to get funded. And eventually, we'll put, we hope, a new exhaust shaft in with a new surface filter vent system and be able to move air unfiltered and clean, and so we can move larger amounts and do a lot more work that way. So there's a lot of details between the short-term fixes and the long-term fixes, and although I wasn't planning to provide those details, now's maybe a good time for questions. So we have one right here.
Thanks, John. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I thought that the new ventilation system was going to be in a different location than the current ventilation system.
That has yet to be determined. Part of the process is that we're required to analyze the various capabilities and present them as alternatives, and that's a formal process through the project management system. And so there are alternatives, there's different ways to plan that, and so none of that has been approved yet. Okay? A couple other things I want to point out on the graphic is, again, like I said, the air comes in from the atmosphere, gets pulled into the mine, and then goes back out through this filter system. And so the interim ventilation system and the supplemental ventilation systems are going to just supplement what's there. They're going to allow us to move more airflow, allow more workers to be down in it, down in the mine, more equipment to be used. But we're also going to be controlling where that air moves because there's airborne contamination, and we're going to have to continue to control that. So we'll go from what was at one time a fairly clean underground repository to a not so clean underground repository. Although we've cleaned it up quite a bit, the risk of airborne contamination moving is still there. So we're managing it as a radiological facility with contamination potential.
JR?
Yes.
Does this system also take into account, you were going to go look at, using diesel type operation versus using electrical, right?
We did perform several evaluations of various equipment that are available for use in underground mining, and we have incorporated some of those improvements. For example, we have a rock bolter that's a hybrid that uses both diesel and electric power. Okay. Electric power is limiting sometimes. Not only that, but it introduces a new hazard when you're dealing with batteries. And so you have to balance that with diesel operations and the exhaust fumes with the diesel. And so one of the alternatives now is a hybrid bolter. And there's a couple of other new things still in consideration, but electric bolters was one of the things that was evaluated. The decision was to go with a hybrid. So in some cases, they do have to run the diesel in order to get the power they need, but in other cases, they don't. Okay. Here's a couple of pictures of the interim and the supplemental ventilation system fans. Again, the interim system is surface facilities where we've added fans and filters on the surface to pull additional air through more filter banks. The supplemental ventilation system is down in the repository where it redirects airflow into other areas of the mine so that where clean air is needed and can be contained, we can move more airflow there, whereas the contaminated air or the potentially contaminated air will continue to go through the filters. Moving on to one of our major readiness activities, and that'll be a new documented safety analysis. There's a new DOE standard that applies, and so we're having to rewrite our documented safety analysis for WIPP to not only consider the new standard, but consider all the changes that are being made in the ventilation systems, the operation of a potentially contaminated environment, and the potential for new types of risks with the types of waste that are coming in. Now, those analyses were performed before. We were operating under a DSA before our incidents, but this standard requires us to go a few steps further than we did before in identifying the risks and coming up with mitigating factors to overcome those risks. And so I don't have a lot of details for you, but I will tell you that this is a major part of our readiness preparation. It's a big part of the critical path in developing the new analyses and then implementing the requirements out of those analyses is a major part of preparing the repository for receiving waste again. I mentioned before the contractor and the DOE operational readiness reviews. They're performance-based reviews where independent teams watch actual work being done to procedures. They verify proper training. They verify effectiveness of those procedures. They verify that the DSA mitigating factors are in place and that they're being exercised properly, that the full nuclear operation is ready to go and can be done safely. So a lot of simulations are going to be occurring over the next 11 months, and a lot of improvements will be made to those processes so that when the official readiness review is performed, hopefully we'll be able to get through it smoothly and declare everything ready to go.
JR?
Any more questions? Yes.
Oh, well, maybe. There was a discussion about, you can have mining operation procedures and then you have nuclear waste placement procedures. Have those all been coincided that it's going to work better for both parts of this presently now? Because that was a concern, I think, before, that maybe that was the two weren't coinciding exactly about what was required for preventive maintenance and things like that.
The simple answer is yes, but I'll give you more than that. One of the areas that the Accident Investigation Board identified as a weakness in our system was the fact that we managed differently some of the operations in the mine, different than in the nuclear facility, and philosophically, we probably shouldn't have done that. So we've changed that philosophy, we've changed that culture, and now the entire operation from the gate down into the farthest, darkest corner of the mine is a nuclear operation. And we're going to continue to operate it that way. Now, there are going to be clean areas where we're not going to have to suit people up. We're not going to have to go through the same level of work control processes, but it will be applied where appropriate in the appropriate places from top to bottom. Okay. Next question. Here's one over here.
Excuse me, sorry.
JR, it's good to see you and have you here in our meeting. I always enjoy your presentations. Is the road to recovery, do you have uncertainty cushion factored into the plan?
Yes, we do. The PMB process is a formal process, and it requires us to identify the risks and the uncertainty associated with those risks and to factor that in to give us a probability with a high confidence level that that date of December 2016 is going to come true. And so we have factored all that in. It does have an uncertainty factored into the schedule, and we're highly confident that December is doable.
Okay, thank you.